You're listening to Affected by Altitude, a Colorado Rockies podcast for and by Rockies fans on Rocky Mountain Rooftop. Thank you for joining us as we discuss all things baseball and Colorado Rockies.
Hello, everybody. Welcome here to another edition of Affected by Altitude, a Colorado Rockies podcast, part of the Rocky Mountain Rooftop Network, a proud affiliate of the Fans First Sports Network. I'm your host, Skyler Timmons, joined here wearing his Avalanche hat. It's Evan Lang.
Justice for Howler. Bring back Howler. Please ignore the fact that I'm pretty sure Howler physically assaulted someone in the stands, and that's why he doesn't exist anymore.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, the St. Bernard works, though, really good with Avalanche, too. So, Bernie's
like
a
Bernie.
Good adjustment.
I like Bernie a lot, and I am on record stating I would die for Little Bern, the miniature Bernie that appears on certain theme nights, especially Next Generation Night. But I do miss Howler, and I do miss the Yeti foot just because it was much more unique than the Colorado C, which, again, I'm really hoping still mum's the word on the Rocky City Connect jerseys, but I'm really hoping that they did not go state flag themed.
Nope. 5280 everywhere. 5280 is going to be on everything.
Please no.
Yeah, that'll be some exciting news to have here in the next couple of weeks. Hopefully at some point soon that we'll learn about the City Connects. But plenty to talk about here, Evan, so we can't waste much more time because there's so much happening. As we're recording this, let's start off with this, Evan. As we're recording this, we're doing this before the Rockies Prospect Spring Breakout game against the Chicago White Sox. That is happening. Probably that'll start while we're recording, so we're not going to be breaking down the game and stuff. But at the end of the day, kind of felt like, a bunch of the prospects that'll be in the game, we've seen them through spring training, so we've seen what they have to offer and whatnot. And not a whole lot with that roster, but there's a lot of talent, Evan, and I think that's what I wanted to start with here is looking at that spring breakout roster. It's a lot of a testament to a lot of the talent in the Rockies system, in their top 30 prospects, and also the fact that a lot of these guys are knocking on the door or on the cusp of reaching the big leagues within the next, even this year, but within the first couple of years here. So overall thoughts, Evan, how do you feel about that spring breakout roster and just the talent that the Rockies are bringing out? Because you cover prospects a lot for the Weekly Pebble Report over at Purple Row.
I will say I am slightly less excited about this roster than I was about last year's, just because last year's was some of the first times we were seeing some of the guys. It was the first time we saw Chase Dollander pitch. It was one of the first times we saw Drew Romo before he had made his debut. Zach Veen played in that game as well. But it was still really a cool thing. And you look at the starting lineup that they've announced for today's game, and it still has so much potential in it. And a lot of guys who, while they may still be a year or two away, are guys that I'm pretty sure we're going to see on the big league roster at some point. You've got Cole Carrig playing in center field, Adele Amador at second base, Drew Romo is playing as the designated hitter. Kyle Karros, who we have talked about at length on this show, is at third base. Sterling Thompson, Warming Bernabel, and Benny Montgomery, Ryan Ritter, Brian Betancourt, and then Gabriel Hughes is the starting pitcher. And there's a lot of really cool prospects playing in this game. This will be the debut in a Rockies uniform of Brody Brecht, one of our high draft picks from 2024.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the difference between last year. The novelty's kind of worn off going into this year because a bunch of these guys you've listed in that lineup, we've already seen at length, in spring training for like Cole Carey, Amador, Romo, Karros. We've seen a lot of those guys in spring training. So for us, it's like for the prospect thing, that was kind of I think the pitch for it is you're going to see these prospects playing against other top prospects, which is really cool. But is it as cool when you've already seen a bunch of these players? Like Brecht, of course, that's probably the most exciting prospect, but it's only going to be one inning that he's going to throw, is what Thomas Harding was saying. So, that's awesome. You get to see him. But at the end of the day, I think the novelty of the spring breakout is kind of, at least doesn't have as much shine for the Rockies this year because we have seen so many of these prospects.
Yeah. Especially, we saw a lot of these prospects in last year's spring breakout game.
Yeah, that too.
And there are some new guys on here and some guys that I'm looking forward to seeing. Jordy Vargas, who is returning from Tommy John surgery, did not pitch in 2024. I am really excited to see him pitch and see how he's doing. Some new faces include guys like Cole Messina, Kelvin Hidalgo, Ashley Andahar, who is only 17 years old and playing in this game, and then Jared Thomas, who, another friend of the show here. So there are guys to be excited about seeing, but just the overall roster is, I think, just less exciting than last year because we've seen some of these guys before.
And a lot of that excitement, Evan, was sucked out within these last couple days because of the unfortunate injury that has happened to Charlie Condon, the Rockies' 2024 first-round pick, 3rd overall. He was going to be in this game for the spring breakout, but then in the first minor league game of spring, facing the Athletics, he's in left field, diving for a ball, ends up rolling on his hand and taken out of the game to evaluate. It was a wrist injury, just the extent of it. Initially, we didn't know, but then it is a non-displaced fracture. So that's the good news. Bad news, yeah, he hurt his wrist. The good news, Evan, is that it's not a severe that doesn't need surgery. None of the ligaments were injured, it sounds like. So he'll just be in a splint for 4 weeks and then can resume baseball activity in 6 weeks total. But that was just took the wind out of our sails.
Yeah.
Breakout roster.
It's a big buzzkill. And I'm not going to say that it's not, even though the news is better than we could have expected.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of murmurings going around that the Rockies were pretty concerned it might be serious before they did a full evaluation. And, here are the bright sides of the injury. It's his non-dominant hand. So while it does affect his hitting, he's gonna be able to recover from it. Okay. It's a non-displaced fracture, which means the bones are all where they're supposed to be. He doesn't need surgery to correct that. There's no ligament damage or soft tissue damage as far as we're aware. It is a simple broken bone that he's going to be in a splint for 4 weeks, and in 6 weeks he can resume baseball activity, and we could have him back in May at some point. It likely means that, he might have a repeat assignment to start in Spokane just to get his legs back underneath him, since he's not doing a full camp ramp up. But overall, the news is much less bad than it could have been. Now, the bad news is that he is one of the Rockies' top prospects, no longer playing in the game, in the spring breakout game. And yeah, this probably does delay his timeline at least a little bit.
Yeah.
But it doesn't delay it that much. He is missing a couple weeks at the beginning of the season. The quote-unquote good thing is that it happened early enough in spring. Like you said, the very first minor league spring training game is when this happened, which means he's got plenty of recovery time.
Yeah, and I know fans are... One, it's just that hard because he didn't hit the ground running after he gets drafted because he has the bone spur in his hand. He just wanted to play through it with the thumb, and so he tried to change his batting grip, and that screwed things up for him. So yeah, and I think we both kind of chuckled. A lot of people starting to throw in the towel and worry that he's a bust of a draft pick and everything. He just barely got drafted.
Yeah, he played like a handful of games.
He played like 20 games.
And the thing for Condon is he just did the exact same thing that Zach Veen did, which is he's hurt. It's more serious than it needs to be. But he doesn't want to miss time. He wants to keep playing. Baseball players are creatures of both habit and ego. And he did harm to himself, but he did get the surgery. He got that bone spur from his thumb removed. Same as Zach Veen got finally his wrist fixed up. And the extent of the damage is much less severe, I think, because he's still unanimously basically the Rockies' number 2 overall prospect. He's still going to be. And does it stink to lose him for this beginning part of the minor league season? Yes, absolutely. But at the end of the day, I've had multiple people come to me and be like, how worried should I be about this? And honestly, my answer is not really.
Yeah. And no, here's the quote from Condon. I found out that it was a fractured the same. When I found out that it was fractured the same day, Condon said, "Hearing that today, that is nothing but that it's nothing but a small fracture. Honestly, it's about as good as it gets as far as a broken bone goes. It was a big time relief. It kind of gives me a little bit of path of where and when I'll be back." So that probably the silver lining in this. Yeah, it sucks that he's injured and we'll get a little slower start to a season. But the fact that it is that small fracture, so he'll be able to get back up and run. He can still probably do some strength stuff, not doing baseball activities because you need your hand for that kind of thing. But the fact that he can still do some things to say up and ready to go, and then by the time the summer hits, probably back in good action. So yeah, it sucks that he's injured, but at least it could be worse.
Yeah.
And so we can take some respite in that and knowing that, yeah, he'll be back going here in like May. Yeah, we have to wait in like another month, but good for it to happen at this point in spring training for him. And he had that little bit of experience of playing games, facing the big league pitching and inter squad matchups. So plenty of time for Condon, and hopefully once he gets healthy, he can tap into what he was doing in Georgia.
And I don't want to like jinx it or anything, but overall, this is not one of those things that'll nag like a back injury or soft tissue damage. Like he's gonna probably need a PT regimen to rebuild strength in his wrist and hand on his left hand. Okay, but that's about it. Yeah. Like this is about as routine as a routine injury can be, and that's something to be thankful for, at least, because I know we've all learned to expect the worst, especially with these spring training injuries. We had, the Brendan Rodgers shoulder injury. We had Sean Bouchard explode his bicep that one time.
Brendan Rodgers injured his leg that other time. Yeah, awful stuff. But yeah, but we'll wait for him. We'll be looking forward to seeing him in action again. It sucks that we have to wait a little bit more because of just the bad taste in our mouths from his last summer, his little bit of action. We have to wait just a little bit more. He'll be behind, but we'll see. But good luck to Condon. Could have been worse. That's the Rockies motto. Could have been worse for a lot of things. But yeah, so that kind of took the wind out of the sails of the spring breakout. For me personally, Dollander also, we've seen him plenty in spring training, and he'll be sitting out because he just recently pitched in big league camp, and he's scheduled to start here again in a couple of days. So he'll be sitting out the game, but good to see Hughes. Gabriel Hughes, though, and a lot of these guys that are on that cusp, a Hughes, an Agnos, Hill, Blaylock, guys that have made an impact in big league camp and then get to go show off in this spring breakout, that timeline. And I think Hughes, like we talked to him, a lot to be excited about. Good for him, and that was big confidence booster.
Yeah.
Really good big league camp for Gabriel Hughes.
That's one of the things I'm most excited about for the spring breakout game is watching our boys like Hughes and Romo, Agnos, Karros, especially all of these guys have had really impressive springs. And we talked about a little, but basically right after we finished recording or the day after last week, they reassigned Gabriel Hughes to the minor league camp, which was to be expected. We knew he was not going to be on this opening day roster. But it's still going to be really exciting to watch all these guys play. And, guys like Agnos, who is still potentially auditioning for a spot on that big league roster, one of the few guys left who has not been reassigned to the minor league camp yet.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's just an extra moment for them to showcase themselves on a national scale, more or less. I do think it's kind of a shame that they pitted the Rockies and the White Sox against each other, the two worst teams in baseball last year. But
hey, two of the three worst teams in baseball last year. Thank you very much. Let's not let the Marlins get away scot-free.
Yeah, but they're not in Arizona right now. I just found it funny. It's those two teams, prospects, going against each other. But best of luck to them. And again, not much to break down with the game. That's why we figured we can record early and just enjoy the game watching it ourselves. But yeah, best of luck to all of them. And just the future's bright with Rockies farm system. So that's a big takeaway. There's hope and help on the horizon. Let's hope it pans out. One quick thing here before we go into our break, Evan. First break. Kyle Freeland named the opening day starter. Sounds like he'll be making yet another one in his career. K Free has looked pretty good here in spring training, Evan. He's looked like it, kind of like he did last year. Let's hope that carries and he doesn't have the blowout on opening day like he did last year.
I think, well, because remember when we were watching him in spring last year and we were like, man, his fastball's gotten way faster, that he's found a nice even middle ground where instead of ticking up at past 94, he's 92, 93. Like, he's not going to blow the doors down, but he does have that improved velocity still. And his last start, he's pitching right now. I'm not sure what's going on in that game, but his last start against Cincinnati, he struck out 8 batters and really didn't start to lose it until, his 4th inning, 5th inning of work. And that's just fatigue at that point because you're not fully stretched out. So not something I'm particularly concerned about. But this is Kyle's, I believe, 4th opening day start, which is really cool. And honestly, where this roster is at right now, I can't think of anybody else who you would have picked to be the opening day starter.
Yeah.
I think Erman's not quite there yet. Senzi, while he's looked great, is not your opening day starter guy. He's, your back end of rotation guy. Gomber is hurt. And, I think Kyle was ultimately the best decision.
Yeah. No, he's the Colorado kid. No, I think that's a big thing in his development, his understanding at this point in his career too. I'm not going to overpower guys. I got to get a little bit more crafty. He was working on trying to get that sweeper going this season, working on that in spring training. So him getting a better understanding of who he is as a pitcher, his role and how he can be effective, even without shooting for that velocity. He's the leader in that clubhouse. And when he's good, he's good. And we saw that last season because we saw when he was bad, goes down with the injury, and then comes back and does pretty good in that second half of the season. So not too shabby. And thus far at time of recording, in the top of the second, he has thrown 1 scoreless inning.
Top of the second, not off to a great start. He plunked our old enemy Harold Castro, which hey, game's not televised. I'm not saying it's intentional, but I would. And then walked Calvin Biggio on 4 pitches. But the first inning, 2 strikeouts, which he's been working the strikeout stuff this spring, which is nice to see. So is Senzatela, honestly. Yep. But it's been nice.
Yeah, so congrats to Kyle Freeland, setting a franchise record. It's 3rd consecutive opening day start, his 4th overall. Still got him under contract for at least another year, at least. So K-Free just keeps it going. Good luck to him. But we'll take our first break here. When we come back, we got to talk about some comments from a certain individual that owns the Rockies. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back here to Affected by Altitude. And now for Evan's favorite segment of this episode is talking about old Richard Monfort, owner of the Colorado Rockies, who made his rounds in the headlines this week for some comments, talking to Mark Kisla of the Denver Gazette, which the context of this interview or the conversation, they were just sitting there in the seats, like in the stands at a spring training game and just having these casual conversations on the record. It seemed kind of weird to me because then, the Reds general manager, owner, or somebody joins them.
I don't know. I thought that part was kind of neat. I like, it's a nice setting for it. It is weird, but yeah, I have no problems with that.
Because this whole conversation, you find over the Denver Gazette, and then it's been making the rounds. But Evan, it read like this was a conversation that Dick Monfort didn't intend to have on the record.
Probably
but then Mark
not.
Kisla is like, "Oh, I'm going to write about this."
While I've got you here, we made it all the way into spring training before Dick Monfort said something that made people mad. It usually happens a lot earlier in the year, usually at some sort of luncheon or small event or smaller interview. And honestly, the worst thing he said was his proclamation that, the Rockies were going to have the best ever infield defense in baseball, which is pretty tame as far as those sort of proclamations
Baseball
go.
history.
But now we've made it this point, and as we were prepping for the episode, Skyler says, we really should talk about what Dick Monfort said, and I literally said, do we have to, though? Because but yes, we do.
Yeah, so the gist of it is Dick Monfort talking to Mark Kisla, the Gazette. It more or less boils down to Dick Monfort wants a salary cap. That's the main thing that he wants. And here's probably the quote that is making the rounds the most, and kind of the biggest takeaway here. If you're watching the video version, it says the only way to fix baseball is to do a salary cap and a floor. With a cap comes a floor. For a lot of teams, the question is, how do they get to the floor? And that probably includes us, or that includes us probably. But on some sort of revenue split deal, I would be all in. And so Dick Monfort, more or less, being the voice of the owners here with the CBA coming up, negotiations coming up at the end of 2026, Dick Monfort placing himself of, we need a salary cap, because he points to the Dodgers spending, the big team spending, and still places himself in the small market of we can't compete with the spending and everything. And I think we've been in that. Well, we'll get into that. But first reaction when you see these comments from Dick Monfort, Evan, is he off base, or is there some legitimacy to the things he's talking about with the salary cap and competitive nature in baseball?
So first of all, I think the CBA coming up after 2026 is going to be brutally bad. And it's largely going to revolve around the salary cap. I think a lot of people understand this, and I think that's why we grimace when we see these kinds of quotes from the owners, because we know where this is headed. Honestly, I've gone back and forth a lot on what my stance is on whether there needs to be a salary cap or not. I do think there needs to be a salary floor, much more than just the part of the CBA to keep the Players Association from filing grievances. I do think you need to make it so that teams have to spend a certain amount of money, because we saw in Oakland for years them spend the absolute bare minimum they possibly could until they got what they wanted and moved out of Oakland, and now all of a sudden they're spending money.
Well, part with Oakland is also because of grievances from the Players Association of you're not spending enough money on doing stuff. So then the A's are starting to do that now, trying to get up to a certain threshold. So because they're technically a big market team, and so there's certain stipulations they need to get their payroll up to a certain point, so to get around those grievances. But continue on.
But I think of all of the owners to make a statement about this, I think people get mad at Dick Monfort because during the last lockout, he was pretty heavily involved. He's pretty well liked by the other owners, and he was involved in a lot of the early negotiations of CBA that were going pretty badly. So I think that left a lot of a bad taste in people's mouths. But Dick Monfort, of all owners of a smaller market team here in Denver, and a team where, we've said this time and time again, the Rockies aren't bad because they're cheap. The Rockies have consistently been, over the last 10 some years, middle of the pack, solid spending. The problem is they spend their money poorly versus, other owners who have been sort of notoriously cheap. The owner of the Reds, the owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates, the various owners of the Miami Marlins. That's more of, I think, had they spoken up, I think people would be even more up in arms. But the Rockies do have that negative connotation of people think that they're a cheap team.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have, this was on the Yankees network, where you had Hal Steinbrenner, the owner of one of the richest teams in baseball in one of the biggest media markets in the world, one of the biggest, most popular baseball teams in the world, complaining about the salary cap, how there needs to be a salary cap, and complaining about the Dodgers spending. That left much more of a bad taste in my mouth than Dick Monfort, where, the Rockies have to play the Dodgers a ton every year, And I'm sorry, but it's true. A small market team like the Rockies, small to mid market, will never be able to keep up with that kind of spending. That's just not possible. And I know people will go out and say, well, oh, he's a millionaire, billionaire. He just needs to do it. It's like, yes, but where does that money come from compared to the Dodgers? It's just not realistic. But then you've got Hal Steinbrenner out here, causing a big stink about what the Dodgers are doing. It's like, you are literally one of the only other teams that could keep up with that kind of spending. You just choose not to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I said all this, like, there is merit to, I know what he's trying to get at, but also a lot of the reasoning's still flawed. Because, yes, the competitive balance in baseball is pretty skewed right now because the Dodgers have taken it to a whole nother level. Because, yeah, not all teams are created equal financially. Yes, these are owned by millionaires, billionaires, a lot of millionaires. But even then, they have a set amount that they set aside for the baseball team. Like, not every cent they own or that they're worth is poured into the baseball team. They take a certain amount and allocate a certain amount of budget and put that towards the team. Now, have the Rockies also been kind of cheap over their history? Yes. Have they spent money poorly? Yes. Just because you spend money doesn't mean you're going to get to the World Series, and we've seen that. But even then, you still have to be smart about things. When it comes to the Dodgers, yeah, their spending's out of control with the ability to also defer contracts and the amount of money that has been deferred to a future date, and they're able to lure in players. Shohei Ohtani technically being on the books, being paid $2 million for what he does as a player with that 680 that's been deferred. There is an imbalance in the game and in the financials of it.
But part of that imbalance is due to the fact that the Dodgers do everything else really well in addition to spending. We've had multiple players that signed with the Dodgers this offseason say that they took less money from the Dodgers because they wanted to play with the Dodgers because the Dodgers are a winning and smart organization. They have a great farm system consistently. They're great at identifying and developing prospects. It's one of the reasons why they've been so cavalier with some of their prospects is because they can throw somebody away and immediately have someone else ready to rock and roll with that. It's that they do everything well. And while their spending is enormously frustrating and can't be matched by a team like the Rockies, a reason why the Rockies can't, get people to come sign with them is because they've been bad for so long, because they don't do things smart a lot of the time.
Yeah, because financials, we can see the merit where the Rockies are coming from, where the collapse of the RSN sports model, where the Rockies, they lost a good deal of money from those TV revenue deals. Meanwhile, the Yankees and Dodgers have those lucrative contracts for TV and revenue. Now, the Rockies are already a revenue split team. They already receive revenue. But how much of a difference does that make, all things considered? And so there is merit to a cap, but I also think at this point, how do you compensate with a lot of the contracts already out there? We've already gone this far in baseball without one. It would be really hard to ever get the players union to agree to that. Like, they will absolutely, that's a non-starter for them. A floor, we've had this conversation before, where even a floor, it helps, but also teams can just get around it by giving, honestly, a lot of the big contracts extensions that the Athletics have done recently, where, we already have this guy, we'll just throw the money at him, give him a raise, and we're technically up to the threshold, and then we can still be cheap in other areas. So there's merits and arguments for and against both, but the cap isn't going to change. And I think this is what we're getting to. A salary cap or floor is not going to fix the Rockies' problems with the way they are run as an organization, specifically because of the man making these comments in Dick Monfort.
Yeah. It was Dick Monfort's decision to give Ian Desmond a 5-year, $70 million contract. It was Dick Monfort's ultimate decision to give Chris Bryant 7 years for $182 million. His overall meddlesomeness in this team is behind a lot of the really bad decisions. And a lot of the GMs we've had over the years have gotten not undeserved scorn from the fans because of these bad moves, but you also have to remember who's at the top of the food chain for this team, and it's Dick Monfort. And there was a glimmer of hope in that. In this same interview, he talked about Dick Monfort's 71 years old and won't necessarily be the chief executive officer of the Colorado Rockies forever. But imagine what the Rockies could accomplish if he wasn't so gosh darn stubborn. We've talked about this so many times that people say, Dick Monfort doesn't care about winning. He only cares about making money. And if you've ever interacted with Dick, if you've ever been around the team, you should know that that's not true. He very much wants to win. The problem is he is too darn stubborn to win without it being his way and his guys. He's the guy who said that outside ideas aren't worth trying because they just wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem. It's not the money. It's the guy.
Yeah. And, there are the problems. And heck, he acknowledges, like one of my fellow owners said, the problem is ourselves, Munford's told Kisla. You've got 30 owners and they're all diverse. The system works for the big markets, but it's gotten to the point where the big markets can't make any money because they're shelling it all out in payroll. It's always going to go back to money, money, money. But part of it too, you look through that interview and a lot of it, Dick Monfort, the reason the Rockies are awful is because the Dodgers are so good and have so much money. Whereas you can look at around the league, money does not equal wins. It certainly does help. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the playoffs, that's a crapshoot. But look at the Cleveland Guardians, who spend less than the Rockies, don't really go after big talent because they're so good at developing and doing things. So you look at that interview, it's a lot of, I think we just get sick of just the complaining. Because, yeah, we complain too. It sucks losing all the time when you're covering a team that you love. I know it's hard for the players, but when he says, "I just wish it wasn't so damn hard," there's just a lot of complaining. Own up to it instead of just, "Woe is me. I can't make any money with this, and we can't win games." Then figure out a way to do so.
Yeah, because
I'm hearing a lot of whining and not a lot of solving.
Yeah, because just because the Dodgers spend a lot of money does not make them an unbeatable juggernaut. Yes, they won the World Series last year. They were on the precipice of elimination multiple times during that series.
Yeah.
They were eliminated by the Arizona Diamondbacks in 2023. And do I think that there are some things that need to be sorted out? Yes, I think you do need to find some way to make a salary floor work that's going to make it so that teams have to spend a minimum amount of money, but they're not allowed to, mess with it or rig the system so that they can do the bare minimum to scrape by or just give out bad contracts to reach that floor. I also honestly do think that I don't think deferring payments needs to go away because literally any team can do that, but no team can match the amount of deferred payments. I do think there needs to be a limit. Like, okay, you can only have so many dollars in deferred payments until this amount of time. I think that would make sense. Of like, we're not saying you can't do it, but if you have over $1 billion in deferred money up through 2038 or whatever,
yeah,
that's not something that other teams would be able to match.
Yeah. And like with a cap, maybe when it comes to a cap, there should just maybe be the starker penalties for kind of like with the draft lottery where you can't pick in the top 10, but it's some do with draft picks or you lose something instead of just having to pay a fee because for some of these teams, it's just chump change. Like, well, we're already in this deep. What's another $1 million that we can pay in a fee? So many things that will be on the table. But when it comes to the Rockies and Dick Monfort is start taking the ownership and accountability. Realize, yeah, I haven't done well enough with this, and I'm determined to figure something out. We're investing in this to figure out pitching at Coors Field so we can be top notch. Here's how we're going to make Coors Field our advantage every year, and here's how we're going to improve our development and all these things. But instead, it's just well, the Dodgers beat us up again. It's unregulated. We can't make money. We're going to lose. Like, enough of that garbage. Just own up to it.
Yeah. And like it always feels like it's a couple steps, it's one step forward and two steps back with this team, where they start doing things right. Their pitching lab in Arizona and some of the other stuff they're working on, fantastic. Love it. Some finally starting to, put some money and some science behind some things. And then this stuff, or a bad contract, or loading the team up with veterans again that you don't need.
Yeah. So it's just frustrating when it comes to Dick Monfort. I know he means well, and I can understand where he's trying to come from, but the messaging and methodology behind it is still so very much flawed.
Yeah.
Where let the Dodgers do whatever the heck they want. It shouldn't concern you. No, we've talked about it here before. There's things the Dodgers are doing that you can replicate. Maybe not to the degree they are, but you can replicate how they develop and help players get better at the major league level. Their aggressiveness in trying to seek out good players. So many things you could do without having to shell out $1 billion worth of contracts type of thing.
Yeah.
There are solutions and avenues. They just refuse to take them.
Yeah. And it's not maliciousness. And I do think that Dick Monfort probably believes what he is saying.
Yeah.
It's just, it's not a great thing to say. And it's not a good look for a team to be whining about, oh, these are the big old mean teams with all their money, when the reason why the Rockies are bad is not due to a lack of spending. It's due to
ineptness.
I was going to say it a lot less diplomatically, of complete organizational incompetence.
Yeah. And stuff like this, it's just painting a picture on the Rockies' back even more so, because then the players, have to feel the fallout of this. Well, our owner stuck his foot in his mouth again and all this stuff. And, I was watching the video of that foul territory. And even though I do not like Eric Kratz and AJ Pierzynski and Scott Braun, kind of a interesting individual, even there, like, they have the right idea of like, yeah, these are dumb comments type of thing. And the Rockies need to start doing things better, focus on stop looking outward and blaming everyone else for your problems. Got to look in the mirror and make a change. Who? That's a Michael Jackson reference. Yeah. Good old Monfort, as they kept saying on foul territory. It was driving me nuts.
I mean, better than
Monfort. It's just Monfort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really know what else to say on the matter. It's frustrating to have an owner who just consistently finds a way to stick his foot in his mouth in a way that damages the reputation of the team, of the fans, of the players. It's frustrating, especially when, we know that you can be a good team without spending a crazy amount of money, but you've got to put the resources that you do have behind it. And that's just not something that this team has historically done.
Yeah. And the owners are sowing the seeds. Like you said, owners love him. He's a hardworking guy. He's a champion for the small market teams. But us, if you ask a Rockies fan who follows the team, that doesn't fill us with much confidence of when CBA comes around, he's going to probably be a lead negotiator for the owners on the workforce in those meetings. Doesn't fill us with a lot of confidence. And they're like, if this issue with like caps and stuff be a big sticking point, could honestly see us losing games in 2026 or into 2027 after that CBA.
I can see, if it gets really ugly, I can see a season. Yeah. I can see a full season lockout. It's hopefully not, but it can happen.
Yeah.
It's happened in other sports. We are not immune.
Yeah. Because especially when it comes into like the money, this type of money stuff with a cap and a salary which owners are probably going to be pushing hard for. Player, which again, like I can see the value of a cap because some player contracts are getting absurd to where only 2-3 teams can really afford them without crippling their organization. But even look at the Rockies. Chris Bryant's contract has sapped most of their payroll where they're not going to pay for somebody else. And that's on them. But it's just a messy situation. So that'll be fun next year at the end of December. Put this one in the memory bank. Old Dick Monfort's comments about wanting a salary cap and saying, woe is me. It's hard being an owner as he wipes his tears away with $100 bills.
No, he's a man of the people. $20 bills.
$20 bills. But oh goodness. But so that's that. Let us know in the comments your thoughts on Dick Monfort's, your takes on the cap and Dick Monfort's comments and whatnot. But we'll take another break here. When we come back, we're gonna just quick run around in camp, looking at position battles and what the heck is going on in right field. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back here on Affected by Altitude.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Back here on Affected by Altitude, Skyler Timmons, Evan Lang here with you. And Evan, moves are being made or battles are shaping up in spring training. Probably one of the more notable ones came in the bolt with the backup catcher spot. Drew Romo was optioned to AAA. And so it appears Hunter Goodman will be the backup catcher to start the season. At least that's what it looks like, unless they pull a fast one and put Austin Nola there for some reason. But looks like it'll be Hunter Goodman.
I think at this point, so Austin Nola is still in camp, but I think at this point, because you know who else is still in camp is Braxton Fulford. I think that is more of a competition of who's going to get the last AAA spot. Whether it's Austin Nola, if he sticks with the team, he'll be the backup catcher in AAA behind Drew Romo, or if it'll be Braxton Fulford, and Nola gets released or chooses to go to another team or whatever. I think the catching position is now pretty much set. We know that Stallings is the starter, and with Drew Romo optioned, Goodman will be the backup.
It seemed like they want Nola to be a mentor, probably to Drew Romo working down there in AAA. So actually both of them could probably go to AAA because I've hardly seen Nola catch in big league camp. It seems like he's usually playing first base.
Yeah, it's been a lot of first base, and a couple times it's the DH. He has caught a few times, but he's been a little, it's honestly kind of weird.
Well, because there's no other first baseman for AAA. It's like Zach Kokoska maybe was the schedule one, or like Keston Hira, Owen Miller. Those were your options for first base. So
Sean Bouchard has only played like one game at first base this spring. All right, here's the breakdown. 6 appearances at catcher, 6 appearances at first base, and 3 appearances as the designated hitter.
There you go. Yeah, but I feel like Nola probably will stick around because he had a bad AAA year last year. So sees an opportunity there with the Rockies. But good for Goodman. Catching, as always, still work in progress. Hasn't been terrible. And offensively, I think that's the biggest things. The Rockies are just infatuated with that offensive power prospects that he brings to the plate, even though it hasn't consistently showed up yet against big league pitching in his brief stints as a big leaguer these last couple of seasons.
Big thing is that Goody cannot be hitting under Mendoza line this year if he's going to be the primary backup catcher and he's going to be playing a lot more. He cannot be hitting below 200 like he was last year. Mm-hmm. And he's had a good camp so far. Like, I don't want to say that Hunter Goodman's had a bad spring training because he hasn't. He's been pretty solid. But there's still a lot to work on for him.
Yeah. And he's still has to prove it to me because it just still feels like he's William Rosario, just with a slightly better glove, where you're infatuated with the power and like, oh, he could be a power hitting catcher. But at the end of the day, I'd rather just have a good catcher first and foremost, because catcher is a defensive first position, like a lot of other places. Where no, if Goodman was slotted in, like he's going to DH every day. Okay, that's pretty good to me. but it's just, where does he fit in with this team going forward? Because I still in the camp of Romo should be the catcher of the future. Good defensive catcher. Who cares if he throws weird back to the pitcher? He's fine behind the plate in all things if he can just get his offense going. So they're two sides of the same coin. One's a better hitter than he is, and the other one's a better catcher.
The big thing for me for Goodman that he has shown this spring, and granted, it's been against a variety of competition levels since it's spring training, but he's got an on-base percentage of .531 with only 4 strikeouts and 4 walks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that is not sustainable across a full big league season, but if, say, he sat down with Michael Toglia this offseason and said, "Teach me your ways, Sensei," then that could be really big for him.
Yeah, and I was looking at stuff like the quality of opponents, because Baseball Reference will put that down, because it's hard because, oh, well, this player has good stats. Oh, it was coming against the AA and AAA pitchers that were coming in like the 8th and 9th inning, that type of thing. Where among catchers, Drew Romo had faced the toughest competition pitching-wise, and Hunter Goodman a few ticks below him on that. I think he had like the 3rd hardest, tied with Jacob Stallings. So it's like, it's still good competition, but it's always fun to gauge that. But yeah, Goodman still has a lot to prove to me that he could be sustainable. If he can get all this under his belt this season, get really good on both sides, and then Romo can join him at some point this season, and then those two are your catchers heading into 2027 or 2026, not too shabby. Like, you could live with that.
Yeah, especially when, like, I do like a lot of the guys in camp, but right now, between AA and AAA, there's just not a lot of guys who I look at them and go, that could be a big league catcher. When we were doing our State of the Position series over at Purple Row, I was talking with Renee Deckert about the catching depth, and it's just, you've got 2 guys who were drafted in 2024, in Alan Espinal and Cole Messina, who are intriguing, but they've only got the one short little bit of time under their belt, and I haven't seen enough from anybody below Drew Romo to go, you could be a big league catcher.
Mm-hmm. Or at least an everyday big league catcher.
Yeah.
You know, because most of these guys, anybody can be a backup, but it's taken on the bulk starter with a catcher. That's a tough one. But for now, Hunter Goodman is picking up that backup spot for now. And it sounds like Stallings will get the bulk of starts still to start the season, but Goodman can work his way into that if he starts to hit in regular season action. So we'll see. Will he be a Gary Sanchez or a William Rosario? Because somehow Gary Sanchez keeps finding work.
I mean,
area.
Plenty of catchers will always find work. Dom Nunez is with the Guardians this spring in camp.
Yeah. But we'll see there. But catcher pretty much seems figured out as we get closer to the end of spring training. Out in the bullpen, still up in the air, tons of stuff. But Lucas Gilbreth was optioned down to AAA. So that leaves Peralta as the other lefty they're going to start the season with, even though Peralta has been roughed up a little bit here in his last couple outings. But it seems the Rockies are still confident with him and will roll into the season with him. Looks because they wanted 2 lefties, and with Alexander, who he must never pitch on days they have televised games, but he's been fine. And then so maybe Peralta gets the other lefty spot out of the pen. Probably the big one, Evan, is what the Rockies will do with that rotation. Bradley Blaylock, who we've talked about, has had a good spring. They're looking at him as a long reliever, guy who can go multiple innings instead of pitching in the rotation.
I think it all depends on who's where. We still aren't sure if Austin Gomber is going to be ready for opening day. And the team does still need a designated long reliever. Last year it was Anthony Molina and Ty Block in that role at a variety of times. Molina already optioned down to AAA, who's going to be stretched out into a starter. Ty Block, mercifully, no longer on the team. Still not signed at time of recording, which also says a decent amount.
The blockometer.
I like Ty Block, but he doesn't need to be here.
Yep,
and I think long relief could be a good role for Bradley Blaylock. He's shown that he can come out of both the bullpen and as a starter. He's having a really good spring. I think he's earned a spot at this point.
Yeah, they're got him, and then Jake Woodward. What's his name? Woodford. He's also getting plenty of looks. He's started some games. So he's worked both as well. He has the experience. Blaylock, not as much the experience out of the bullpen. But Woodford's still there in big league camp, I believe, as of recording.
Yes.
He hasn't been bad this spring. So he's another guy who could either he's starting down in AAA or can work out of the bullpen for the Rockies. You need a swing guy like that either way. So they're both kind of working with those two where, yeah, they could start, but we could also use them in the bullpen on the big league team if needed.
Yeah. And just looping back to Peralta really quick. Peralta's tough because he has been roughed up. In 6 innings of work, he's a 13.5 ERA. But he's also got 10 strikeouts. His strikeout stuff is working, but when he gets hit, he's getting beat up a little bit.
Yeah.
But again, it's also spring training. You've got to keep everything with a grain of salt. Why is it all got to be so complicated?
Yeah.
Yeah, the bullpen is, in my opinion, I have no clue how it's going to end up shaping up because we've got multiple guys who have struggled pretty badly. Justin Lawrence is gone. Jake Bird has not been having a good time this spring. Angel Chivier has been very hit or miss. Luis Peralta is striking out guys at an insane clip, but also getting demolished. It's been all over the place. Basically, the only 2 guys right now who I consider a lock for the bullpen are Tyler Kinley and Scott Alexander.
Yeah, Seth Halverson probably I haven't followed much with Victor Vodnik either. So there's a lot of unknowns we know the names. It's just who's going to fit into those slots to start the season. Because I'm sure there's going to be some interchangeable names and places throughout the year because they have the options. So you can cycle throughout the season to get fresh arms in there as needed.
Vodnik's had his ups and downs. He's made 6 appearances, 6 total innings. He's got 7 strikeouts, but he has given up a couple earned runs. Not perfect, but nothing that I am terribly concerned about with him. He's only given up 1 home run. It's 3 earned runs on 7 hits, but he's only walked 1 batter in those 6 innings. I can live with that, especially when, again, it's spring training.
Mm-hmm.
And Halverson's had a fine spring as well. It's been hit or miss. A lot of the young guys have had very mixed spring trainings, which is to be expected.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so bullpen will get figured out here. But the thing to finish out here as we get close to the end of this episode is what is going on with the outfield, specifically right field. Because entering spring training, we assumed Nolan Jones in left, Brent Doyle in center, Jordan Beck in right. Well, both Beck and Jones got off to rough starts at the beginning of spring training. They've started to pick up a little here in their last couple of games here in spring training. Nolan Jones had a 4-for-4 day not too long ago, added on a couple more hits the next day. So he's getting into a swing of things. Same with Beck. But they've had some guys nipping at their heels. Zach Veen is still in big league camp, and he has looked good here in spring training, Evan. You have Sean Bouchard, who is still trying to say, hey, I'm around. You can use me. And then you have non-roster invitee Nick Martini, who's having a good spring. And then Sam Hilliard is still around. His spring has not been as good, but the fact he can play center field is carrying a lot of weight for him.
Yeah, I think it's important to start with Sam Hilliard, who is 2 for 31 this spring.
With a lot of strikeouts.
With a lot of strikeouts. And I mean a lot. Last time I looked, I don't know if the number is still good. He's striking out well over 50% of the time in spring training at bats. And that's a problem because last year in spring training and over the season, it was that, well, he's still going to strike out a lot. He has dialed back the strikeouts. And this spring, it's been a problem. He's struggling pretty bad. And it really is right now the fact that he can play center field that I think is keeping him in the conversation.
Yeah.
But honestly,
the thing with the center field is because both Veen and Beck can play it. Jones can too. Not to the level that Sam Hilliard could. He's definitely the best center fielder out of all those options. But how does that matter if he's not doing anything else offensively? And you can throw Veen or Beck out in center field for a day during the week just so Doyle gets off his feet.
Yeah,
especially when Bouchard can play right field for a day.
Yeah, especially when Sean Bouchard and Nick Martini, both exclusively corner outfielders, are having much better springs. At this point, I would not have Sam Hilliard making this roster. And yeah, that's a problem. But then if you keep Jordan Beck or you call up Zach Veen, then you can do rotations. You can, like you said, even have Nolan Jones occasionally play. I think Nolan Jones has picked it up enough that he's made himself a lot more secure. He's playing solid defense, and over the last couple games, he's really started to round into form. Granted, his last time out yesterday at them recording, tough day against White Sox pitching, 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts. But the entire team didn't do well against White Sox pitching, which is not great. But at the same time, I have seen enough out of Zach Veen that it's like, I want him on the opening day roster.
Yeah. Yeah, he's done enough. I feel like as he's matured quite a bit. You can tell that on the field and just his composure where he's not swinging at every single first pitch. Like he's showing some patience. He still has the speed on the bases. Still got his flair, which is good. And making contact, he's flashed some power, speed, a lot of the tools that have made him a top prospect for years upon years since he was drafted. So he's making that case for himself, if not to start the season, to get called up pretty dang quick if he continues that and just hits the ground running in spring training like Jordan Beck did last year.
Yeah, and for Beck, it's tough because he's had a lot of ups and downs this year, but I do think that he's still good enough that you could have him on the roster. But at this point, I do think you have a serious conversation of, do we want to start with Veen in right field?
Yeah, well, that's why he's still in camp. Like he's making that a hard decision, which is what you want out of a prospecting camp, is
100%.
Make it a tough decision.
Especially when like all the other major prospect guys have been optioned. Amador and Drew Romo are both going to start the season in AAA Albuquerque, as is Yanquiel Fernandez. Veen and Dollander and Zach Agnos are really the only 3 like prospect guys that have a chance of making this roster. And Veen being the only position player who's got a chance. But in my opinion, he's earned it. And that brings us, unfortunately, to who the fourth and fifth outfielders are going to be, because as much as I hate to say it, Nick Martini and Sean Bouchard have both turned in pretty good auditions to be a backup corner outfielder on this team.
That's the thing for me when it comes to that bench, is because Sam Hilliard can play all 3 outfield positions, and he can play center field, but so can Beck, so can Veen. So they can play all 3. How many outfielders do you need on this roster when it comes to that bench? If we say, let's pencil in Sam Hilliard, then we have our backup catcher, Hunter Goodman, Kyle Farmer. There's 3 bench spots. That really leaves 1. Are you going to fill that with another outfielder?
And here's the funny thing is half those guys can play outfield. Kyle Farmer, Hunter Goodman, Michael Tolia, Chris Bryant, Sean Bouchard, Nick Martini. Like,
how many outfielders do you need? That's why I have like the argument of like, oh, Owen Miller could sneak in type of thing, of another guy who can play strictly infield positions. That's the just, what do the Rockies value more? Do you want more outfielders? How many more outfielders do you need to cover the Rockies? Do you need 6 designated outfielders? 5 designated outfielders plus Chris Bryant, so 6 total on the roster? That seems like a
Yes.
little bit of an overkill to me.
You got to be like the Padres, where everybody on that roster was a shortstop at some point. Everybody on the Rockies roster has to have been
Going
an
with a less
outfielder at some
versatile
point.
position. Everybody's an outfielder. Everybody's a corner outfielder. So it's the nice thing is like Martini, they like him. I feel like he still has that outside chance because just the messaging from this team, you'd rather have a Beck or a Veen there in the outfield. But it's like we were talking about with Sam Hilliard and Jake Cave. It's one or the other, not both. Now, if you want a veteran fourth outfielder who can come off the bench, yeah, go with Martini then, because Hilliard has struggled here in camp. But you also paid Hilliard $1 million in arbitration to keep him around because he can play center field. So it's a mess with that outfield. I don't know what to make of it right now, because we need Thomas Harding to come out and say, like, the Rockies are thinking of this.
Yeah.
But
that's the problem when you've got a team that's as insular as the Rockies, especially when they've been kind of slow with some of their moves compared to other teams, where it's like other teams, like 3 different times a day, you're like, we've optioned this guy and these 3 are reassigned. Oh, and here's some more. Oh, here's some more. And the Rockies have taken their time, and that's not a bad thing. But when they're so insular that we don't really know what their plan is, it can be really frustrating. Yeah. And in my opinion, my opening day outfield would be Jones in left, Doyle in center, Veen in right, Sean Bouchard or Nick Martini as outfielder number 4. And then if you don't, I don't think you can have both of them. And then I would consider Jordan Beck to rotate in right field, center field, and DH.
Interesting. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, it's tough to make sense of.
But we're going to go into the season with this team having like 8 different guys who will play outfield at some point on the opening day roster.
Like, that's what I hate is like there's the clear path, and then as spring training goes on, now they could still drop off Hilliard. No, we saw Lawrence get dropped off, but that was earlier in camp. And I feel like if they were going to make a decision, they would have dropped Sam Hilliard earlier. But instead, I feel like he's still going to be on that opening day roster. They're not going to put too much stock into. He's not a starting right fielder like he had hoped, partly. But I feel like it's going to be between Veen and Beck for that for that starter spot, kind of. And then it'll be one of your veterans. I guess they'll go with those, at least Bouchard. So I feel like that's where we're at, kind of.
Yeah. It's tough because legitimately, I do think in a vacuum, both Sean Bouchard and Nick Martini have done enough to earn spots this spring. Mm-hmm. They have both hit very well. They have both hit situationally. But you don't need both.
Yeah. They're talking about it on the broadcast of Rockies like having that veteran guy like Martini, who seems like he's a popular guy in camp. They like him. But would he just turn into Jake Cave again?
Yes.
Nice veteran leader, and then plays way too much, starts in the outfield a ton, and way too much.
And it's frustrating because they have the format for this. They did this correctly with Mike Moustakas, where he was a non-roster invite. He ended up making the roster. He didn't play too much, but was a great veteran leader, and then we traded him for parts.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, that outfield mix hopefully will get decided as we go throughout this week, as the season draws ever closer. It's coming up soon.
Week and a half, basically.
Mm-hmm. No, the season starts this week with those 2 random games in Tokyo.
Those are going to be fun, though. I'm not going to lie.
So the Rockies could find themselves already down 2 games in the National League West. It's no fair. Why did the Dodgers get that jump start? Mm-hmm. So rooting for the Cubbies. Or they can split. We can overcome a 1-game deficit. Can we, Evan?
I'd be okay with that.
Can we overcome a 1-game deficit?
Speaking of deficits, don't look at the Rockies Royals score.
Hey, but friend of the show, Gabriel Hughes, had a scoreless top of the first or bottom of the first, 1-2-3 in the spring breakout game as we're recording. So
with 2 strikeouts.
Congrats to him. But Evan, where can the folks find you?
You can find me over on Blue Sky at EvanLang27. You can also find me over on purplerow.com writing the Monday Rock Piles. Though this week I will be going on Tuesday and doing the Pebble Reports. Pebble Reports have been going up on both Tuesday or Wednesday, just really depending on what else has been going on that week. This week, Pebbles will be on Wednesday. Remember that you can find Rocky Mountain Rooftop on all of your favorite podcasting platforms of choice, like Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio. You can also catch the video version over on YouTube. And you can find Rocky Mountain Rooftop on pretty much every social media platform, including YouTube, at Rocky Mountain Rooftop. That's at ROCKYMTN Rooftop.
And find me over on Twitter at Skyler Timmons or on Blue Sky at STimmons13. WSKY.social, and writing Wednesday Rock Piles for Purple Row, as well as writing stuff for Fans First Sports Network.com. That's FFSN.com. You can find articles there. You can navigate the page and go find the Rockies, and you'll find our podcast and articles, all kinds of stuff. But until next time, this has been Affected by Altitude. Also, remember, Evan,
keep watching the skis.
That happens. That's baseball.
There we go. Had to load.
That too.
But until next time, I'm Skyler. That's Evan. Hit him with it.
Farewell.
That happens. That's baseball.
This has been Affected by Altitude, a Colorado Rockies podcast with Rocky Mountain Rooftop, a proud affiliate of the Fans First Sports Network. Catch new episodes every Monday on wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Be sure to follow us on YouTube as well for video versions of the show.